Welcome to the Tech Log, your weekly log entry at the intersection of technology and business. Short episodes, real conversations. Let's get underway. I ran enough kickoff meetings to know that the energy at the start of the project rarely matches the energy 6 months in. Something typically happens in the middle. And today I want to talk with Brittany and Lisa about the middle of the timeline when projects seem to go off rail. And it's not just something we've seen. Studies show that technology projects get derailed about 70% of the time. And those that include AI get derailed about 80% of the time. That is a lot of resources, time, money, and human resources that are getting wasted. And it's rarely actually the technology that breaks, it's typically everything around it. This week, we're going to talk about why technology projects fail. Lisa, Brittany, thanks so much for joining today. I asked you two to be on this one because you handle a lot of our technology projects and you've seen a lot of failures, but you've also seen a lot of successes. You also have an interesting angle because you have stepped into projects that have been failing and have turned them around into success. And I think that's a really interesting angle as well. When you look back at a project that didn't quite make it past the finish line, do you typically have a moment where you start to see that project slip? Not the post-mortem moment, not the dry dock when you're talking about the entire experience at the end, but in the moment as the project's going on, have you ever had a moment where you go, okay, this project is going off the rails?
The first thing that comes to mind would be the requirements sign off. Although it isn't always obvious that the project has started to slip when you're at that stage, but it can usually be traced back to that moment. And a couple different examples of how I've experienced this is, clients that don't know what questions to ask, but don't want to admit it, right? They don't want to look like they don't understand their business or processes. So they might sign off even though they still have some questions or uncertainties. And then the other side are these busy stakeholders that almost are rushing through the requirements, right? They just want to get things built. They just want to get this done so they can start using it, especially around the reporting portion. And then months later, they're frustrated that, the metrics they need are here in these reports, but they're built on fields that weren't required. So the data is only there part of the time. And now all of the reporting and metrics, it's not useful. It's not complete.
I want to preface with this answer as, we're a consulting company now, and it's few and far between where we have a project as a consultant that doesn't cross the finish line in accordance with our contract. I would say I really can't think of an instance off the top of my head where we've had a client that's super unhappy at the end or canceling a contract or something like that. Mm-hmm. We do have projects that in my mind don't cross the finish line because they're not in alignment with what I was expecting the outcome to be at the beginning of the project. And certainly before I started this company, I had plenty of experience as an employee at a larger company where we had a number of projects that, didn't make it to the finish line, or we had to back up and start over. And usually that was because there was a lack of experience, a lack of understanding, a lack of, general alignment around what does finished look like. Mm-hmm. So, we can define what finished looks like at the beginning of the project, but the longer the projects are, the more likely it is that you're going to have turnover, you're going to have competing priorities, things are shifting, technology is changing, priorities are changing. And so, I would say any project that doesn't have some amount of flexibility built into it is probably going to go off the rails. And any project where we let the flexibility get to be too lenient also goes off the rails. Going off the rails to me means we get out of whack, when it comes to the schedule, the budget, the original requirements, and we're happy to shift with our clients' priorities, but, it's important for us to identify who the key stakeholders are in the beginning and try to meet their level of expectation of what finished looks like at the end, but that requires them to stay engaged throughout the project. So the most common thing I see is one person says, hey, I'm signing off on this project. We're going to pay this amount of money. We're going to get this thing done. We're going to get it done in this amount of time. I'm going to delegate it. Bye. See you when you're done. And then when we get to the end, that person's unhappy because they didn't participate and we built around the requirements that were given to us during the project. The flip side is the leadership or the key stakeholder gives us all the requirements. We don't get to interact with the business users. Then we get to the end, the manager's happy, the people who have to log in, not so happy. They're like, this isn't our process, And so I would say automating a process when you don't understand it is also a place to be careful.
Requirements is something we're probably going to talk about quite a bit in this episode. And Porn Starboard, we have tried multiple different approaches to requirements. We've gone a more rigid approach, which is probably a more standard approach with a very detailed technical requirements document. If we were actually building a product or on the website, maybe a PRD. And we've also gone a route that is a lot more flexible with a very loose requirements document, more of like an end goal that we were all aiming for and less written out requirements. And we've seen varied success. And of course, like you said, Lisa, across the board it's success. I think when we're talking here about success, we're talking about budget adjustments, timeline adjustments, happy end users that can have a varied success. What are some of your thoughts between a more rigid requirements approach and a more flexible requirements approach?
I think the shorter the time frame and the smaller the budget, the more important it is to have rigid requirements up front. If we're trying to do a short turnaround, fixed cost project, it's really helpful for us as a consulting company to say that these are the requirements that we're building to. This is what finished looks like. And we're not having a bunch of meetings in the beginning of the project to talk about what it is that we're building and brainstorming and all that. The longer the project, I think those projects benefit from a looser requirements document because by their very nature, technology projects are innovative. You want people to get involved and share their good ideas. There are absolutely going to be things that come up that are creative, that are going to be a better solution than what you saw at the beginning of the project. And so being able to allocate time to brainstorming about those things and building those things into the end project or the end result are important. So, it all depends on the client and the project and the budget and the timeline. We've done a lot of sprint-based projects with clients where we'll build in 1 to 2 week sprints, demo what we've built, take feedback, go back to, come back, develop some more, get feedback, develop some more, get feedback. I feel like those work really, really well, as long as they're not a rigid definition of what done looks like, because every time we get feedback, people are going to think of things that they wouldn't have thought of before they saw the end solution.
It highlights the importance that not every project will have the exact same requirements process and the same iterative development process as well, right? Some projects and clients work really well in short, rigid timeframes like you're talking about. And some, their culture works really well with sprints and constant refinement and constant improvement. And so you have to really know your team to then know what kind of IT project you should be stepping into as well. That IT project mindset can definitely creep in. And when I say that, I'm talking in a very typical sense of technology being pushed down from the top and end users using it, whether they really have a choice to or not. And a lot of those do tend to fail. We come in a lot at the point of failure when another consultancy or implementation partner has been let go, and then we are helping with a cleanup. When that happens, what do you think is really sabotaging that process? Do you think it's not enough discovery? Do you think it's just the wrong timeline across the board? I mean, in your experience, when we've stepped in, when a project has failed, why do you think it has failed at that point?
I think there's a misalignment of like what the mindset is, right? Like, so the IT mindset is, success is defined as we went live, we deployed the solution, all done, even if nobody's using the tool or using it right. Whereas the business mindset is success is adopting the tool, using the tool, embracing it as the source of truth. And so I think that disconnect could very easily sabotage a technology project.
I agree with that. When we meet a new client, the first thing for our team to understand is how that business makes money. No technology project done in support of a business is successful unless you have found a way to help that business make more money or make the same amount of money more efficiently with less time or less people. Or if we're talking about customer service, is to retain or grow the retention, again, in less time or with less cost. So a lot of times when we come in and a project has failed, the root cause of that is almost always that either the consulting company or the team that was building that had no idea what that company did, or the people internally that were put in charge of the project were not told what their company did, or were not incentivized to make sure that all of the IT projects they were funding and managing were in support of that company making money.
I think there's also often a gap between the technology ideology, right? I think, Lisa, where you're going with what they consider success, and then just that daily human reality of what the 9-to-5 worker is doing. We see it all the time. Because sometimes we come in and the 9-to-5 employee is so confused what they're even implementing, they don't even actually know what it's going to solve for them. And I think right there is a huge issue, because if you don't understand that pain point, and if the end user doesn't even actually understand the pain point, then you're already off the rails, and it is going to be a failure from that point. That IT director or a consultant or a third-party implementation partner, whoever is pushing this new solution, this IT development, they often come in, often off the end of the coattails of the sales team who sold the product, that this is going to fix everything. Your KPIs are going to get magically hit. Your team is going to be so happy. They cannot wait to log into the solution every day when they get to their computer, right? And then you often have people going, wait, was there even a problem? Because either they're comfortable in the chaos, they don't see something wrong with how they've been doing work, because sometimes they've even had to create their own system and processes to get around their current tech stack, and they're either proud of it or they don't want to, start typing into a CRM versus writing into a notebook. And until that pain point is highlighted and understood, you're going to go off the rails every single time, no matter what approach.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so key. One of the things we like to do is start by shadowing the end users, because oftentimes they're not our stakeholders. They're not the ones, telling us what the requirements are. And the stakeholders are often at least a few degrees removed from the actual work being done. So those pain points that we can uncover when we're watching someone have to click 20 times to just, do the most basic thing, they're revealed when we're shadowing. They're not always coming out when we're talking to the stakeholders and doing that formal requirements gathering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes there's just too big of a knowledge gap between the CEO, whoever's writing the check, and the person who's doing that work every single day. And if the top is driving the technology solution because they were, told from stakeholders or from shareholders that they want something new or something efficient, you're just actually going to create a whole mess down the road. And we've seen this quite a few times. How many times have I'm thinking of one actually in particular, we started implementing a custom CRM, and we get out to meet with the client, and their sales team, their whole process was a yellow memo pad with a stubby little pencil in their car dashboard, right? And that is how they worked, and they had worked well and built strong relationships in that sense. No question that there was some need for efficiencies, but there was a really big gap between what the leadership thought was happening in their sales team and then how they'd actually been operating for a really long time. Let's talk a little bit about the messy middle. Your kickoff was really strong. Everyone's excited and happy to kick off a project. And the course is starting to feel a little bit unchangeable. The hours are starting to add up. I think everyone on the tech side is familiar to this. Why does this keep happening? What on a project manager side or a solution provider side can we do to ensure every step along the way we are trying to manage the mess a little bit more?
Over time, we've experienced this enough times that we've been able to build a lot of things into our process to prevent this from happening. Usually towards the middle of the project, what's happened is we've gotten inundated with great ideas, additional problems, extra stuff. So along the way, we've tried to create places we manage every project with a project workspace, which is basically a multi-tabbed document or, Excel file system. We're not always using the same file type, but it's a workspace. And we have a place where we can track risks. We have a place where we can track future ideas. We have a place where we can track maybe potential bugs that we're going to need to test for, gotchas that we're going to need to test for before we deploy. We're building our deployment plan right from the beginning so that we can identify these risks and things that are going to come up. Because eventually, at some point in most projects, if you don't do that, you're going to have so many loose ends at some point in the middle that's when it becomes really overwhelming, where you're like, I feel like we need a reset and I don't even know what I need to say to reset. If you're tracking those things along the way, then you can say, hey, we have a bunch of risks that have come up. Let's meet with the stakeholder team and say, here's some risks. And that could be anything from the client's project manager is unexpectedly going to be out of the office for the 2 weeks before we're deploying the project. Do we need to shift the go live date? Or that could be, hey, it's come to our attention that your sales team is using this other piece of technology that doesn't integrate with the solution that we're building. Do we need to account for some changes to the requirements document to make sure that they're not having to do, we don't want to make one part of their process more efficient and then create more work for them in another downstream place. The other thing that you have is a list of good ideas, follow-on projects. That way everybody feels heard, but you're not going down all these different paths of, oh, let's add this into the solution. Let's add this into the solution. We want to make sure that our clients are happy and that we're hearing their good ideas and we're making sure that there's a place for those. It's great to hear those ideas because then if there are some that they really are excited about implementing down the road, we can make sure that we're creating the right foundation to build on that later, but we don't have to build every single one of those things before we get to the end of the project.
Yeah, so for example, I had an integration project earlier this year. The stakeholder I was working with was wonderful, but also very busy and pulled in many different directions. And we had a really short time frame. We needed to get this live before this big meeting with a bunch of other departments to showcase this integration. And pretty early on, it was clear that my stakeholder was just had their hands in so many other things. And, they were saying, we're going to have to push this, requirements meeting 2 weeks out. And I just had to have, an honest conversation and said, if we want this project delivered in time, we've got to carve out an hour somewhere in the week. We've got to carve out 1 hour to go through and finalize these requirements. And we were able to do that. And because we took the time up front to iron out all of those details, I didn't have as many questions or changes later on. I mean, anytime you're doing an integration, there's, always things that are going to come up that are unexpected. But raising the risk earlier, communicating it clearly, getting some time set aside, we were able to get everything done on time. And we had a little extra time at the end, a few extra hours that we were able to do a couple of those while we're in their request that had come up during the project. Like, oh, wouldn't this be nice? We were able to tack some of those on. But only because we were doing a good job of identifying those risks, managing them, communicating them, identifying those new requirements, separating them and saying, we would love to do this. If we have time, we will. If not, it can be a follow-on. Mm-hmm. So I think it all comes back to just the communication.
And that's where the strength of a project manager lies, right? We've talked in the last few episodes of roles greatly shifting. Product managers and project managers and engineers, we're seeing those roles become very holistic and blurred lines between what is your role actually doing. And I think what you're talking about, Brittany, is fantastic because it's not going to just be the project manager's responsibility, especially in an IT project, a large one. It might be that consultant or that engineer or that UI or UX designer that needs to have that same mindset to catch those potentials really early. Something Matt and I have been doing. So Matt is our web developer, and we do a lot of websites for clients. And a small ritual we've been doing is in our pre-kickoff meeting, we write down, what does success look like in this project? And we answer it in a sentence form because I think it's really important to not just write it as a requirement, but to understand, okay, what is this client's end goal with their site and what do they want to do? Whether that's an ERP or CRM, you could use that example across the board. But we also write down what is a failure. So what would it look like if this failed? Because we want to stay away from that as much as possible. And one of the things we have found on our team when writing down that question is we aren't showing our web clients full, beautiful prototypes or mock-ups right away, because that has been creating issues for us very quickly. And so we've been going back to more of a wireframe black and white just initially. And we found that by pulling reports of our projects and seeing where our hours peaked. Where did we see hours peak in our projects? It was always between the first and second design review. And so we wanted to build in a bit of like a poka-yoke, which is a Japanese term for like a mistake proofing. We knew we needed a ritual. We needed something to happen there to reduce that hour peak so that we could keep that project on the rails. Do either of you have something that you're doing in projects to help keep them on the rails? Maybe those small little things.
So lately, what I've been doing, I don't know if you noticed this after you came back from maternity leave, but I actually added a slide to the web proposal deck that says what success looks like. Copy that slide into the kickoff meeting. So now we're putting what does success look like in the proposal deck, putting it in the statement of work, repeating it again in the kickoff meeting. And I'm tempted to say that we should be repeating that at the beginning of every project meeting we're having. I actually thought of this yesterday afternoon. I was sitting in one of my volunteer, I'm on a number of boards and commissions here in Virginia Beach. And at the beginning of every meeting, the chair reads the purpose of the group out to the group. So whether it's on the commission that I'm on or the subcommittee, I'm on this oceanfront enhancement subcommittee. And at the beginning of the meeting, it's like, the mission of the Oceanfront Enhancement Committee is to propose new ideas and perspectives that foster the continued positive transformation of the oceanfront. Like I almost have it memorized because of how many times I've listened to it being said. And it's important because then it just right? Everybody's volunteering. They're all coming from somewhere else. It's a reminder of what's the purpose of why we're here. And then it's easy when a conversation goes in a direction that's not in alignment with that purpose, it's like, that should go to this commission. That's not for us to decide. That's not for us to advise city council on. Move on. And so I think like repeating that, we're a bunch of quick communicators on this team, especially me. I'm from New Jersey. I could just talk really fast. I don't want to repeat myself, but sometimes repeating yourself is important if everybody needs their memory jogged about what we're working on when we get into one of these project meetings. So maybe we even start repeating it in every one of our weekly check-in meetings. Not that we're here to brainstorm new ideas for our own company, but in the spirit of continuous improvement, maybe we should start repeating the success, what definition of success every time we meet.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Yeah, I mean, on the Salesforce side, we've started doing something kind of similar to what you were describing with the wireframes is build small, put it in front of the client, and then you can build bigger. This worked really well with an economic development organization that we were bringing on to Salesforce recently. I find with economic development organizations, they get really caught up in the project process. So they're trying to attract and retain businesses in their area. And so, tracking those projects is a big part of their work and usually a big part of the Salesforce implementation. And so what we did is we built a very simple foundation of that in Salesforce would be their opportunity process. And then we met and showed it to them and gave them something to actually see and react to. Because a lot of times, especially when you're talking about a brand new tool or workflow in the abstract, it's really hard for people to conceptualize what that's actually going to look like. How many fields am I really asking for? How many clicks am I requiring of my users? But when someone can see it, it clicks. And now they're like, okay, here's what we need. I need this required field here. These are some of the, gates that I need to include in this. And so I think it helps you differentiate between what they said and what they actually meant by giving them something to look at and react to before you've sunk, so many hours into this build that now you've got to back out half of.
What they said and what they actually meant is a huge one. Right? That concept is also why a lot of requirements are written down wrong or things go off the rail really quickly. I think it's a reason for needing that flexibility that Lisa was talking about, because oftentimes we hear our clients saying they want something, but we get halfway into the build and they actually meant something completely different. They were usually different terminology, internal terminology. They were just explaining it in a different way than we were understanding it. And Brittany, you're right. The quicker we can get something, an MVP, a prototype, a wireframe in front of somebody to start to see those wheels turn, not only helps keeps a project on rail, but I also find you actually get wonderful suggestions or direction changes out of that as well. And I think that's an important piece for getting that in front of a client even sooner too.
I think it also helps build up some of your like rapport, and they're seeing that like, oh, you do understand like our processes. You're not just this tech consultant coming in here and trying to like fit us into a cookie cutter process. Like you really are trying to like listen and understand and build out what we need, and catching that gap in what they think they want and what they actually meant when the project is only 20% complete is a very different conversation than catching it at the end of the final design review when you're about to deploy everything and the project is 80-90% complete. So
of course, and if you don't catch it early, that makes change management very hard as well. And that's the last thing I want to touch on. That's near the end of the timeline. You're starting to talk about training, onboarding users, launching this, whether it's a new implementation or a customization or even just a small solution that affects their daily workload. We talk about it in kickoffs. It's in pretty much everyone's requirement document. It's somewhere in a timeline outlined, but I find it often is undervalued. There's not a lot of conversation around it. And especially for teams that may not have any type of HR or chief of staff or somebody who's helping drive the connection between the solution and the people. It's often something too, is that the hours build up on a project. That's where you take the hours from, is that user adoption and training. Do you agree with that? Do you think it often gets overlooked or is a little bit undervalued? Do you even think it's as important as maybe I think it is?
I do think good training and user handoff is important, and it might be one of the more underinvested pieces of a technology project. And I can see why it happens, right? Especially a longer term project. Everyone's ready to be done. Project fatigue is a real thing. And then the response becomes, we'll figure it out once we get in there. They'll learn as they go. It also doesn't really impact the main stakeholders as much because they're not the ones in there typing, as it does a disservice to the end users who have been, tasked with learning this new piece of software, whether they, asked for it or not. And now the only resource they have is maybe a 30-minute training where a consultant's sharing their screen and just talking at them, and they're sitting there and their eyes are glazing over. They're not really retaining anything, or the worst thing they could do is turn their camera off, and now they've totally stopped listening. So, I mean, I do agree that it's important and often underrated. I think it's also important to meet people where they are. If you can make the training session a little bit more interactive, or even explain to the stakeholders up front that this is a big investment, this is a big part of making sure that you're getting a return on that investment, is making sure that your users feel like they have been set up for success, because they're not going to use a tool that they don't know how to use, and they're not going to want to ask questions if they're expected to learn everything in a 30-minute call. Nobody wants to be the one that says like, I still don't understand, right, in front of their peers. So yeah, I think, meeting people where they're at, trying to keep a session, short and punchy, but interactive. I like to do popcorn style, which not everyone loves, but I try to warn them up front if I'm going to do that, hey, look, everyone log into Salesforce, have your cameras on. I might start this, and then I'm going to start calling on others. You'll share your screen. We'll all walk through this together. No stupid questions. We're all learning together. Yeah, keeping them engaged, it's going to benefit the whole project.
Mm-hmm. Under investing in that training is having all the ingredients out on the kitchen table, but not giving your team any type of cookbook or instructions, right? And actually what that's going to do is lay the foundation for a ton of frustration. And I think an immediate resistance to whatever solution you just invested in. And there's really nothing worse than having then an entire team feel very lost in, or they feel has completely changed how they have to work or add more time to their plate. Duplicate data entry, right? Something like that, if they're not trained properly, can just be seen as a massive hit to their productivity. And you don't want that to happen. I think something we've been doing on a web development side is also creating training that's very accessible. We're creating training as in a YouTube style, and it's evergreen, and we are handing them off so they can experience a little bit on their own, but it's a reference material where they can always go back and watch it. It's in very short clips. It's in like 2 or 3 minutes, so it's bite size. And it's also something that new users, or if they're onboarding an intern, can very quickly get up to speed on as well.
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to add is, like Brittany said, I think when there's any sticker shock about the budget for a project, the change management and the training is the first thing that clients usually say, well, we can do that ourselves. We can train our own team. We need you to build the solution, but we can do the training. And it's rare that we see a client really execute on that in a way that I personally would do it. And I say that because before we started this company, I was an IT delivery manager for a company that had about 450 employees. And we did a number of long-term projects. And then once we implemented a new solution, I was maintaining that solution for 2 years before I left, and I had a team reporting to me. But the way that we approach change management there, I would say, was a hybrid of organic and formal change management, meaning as we were building the solution, the change management can start up in requirements gathering. You will have less change management to do if you will let the business users be part of the process of building the solution. Because if you're building the solution that they asked for, then they already start to have an idea in their heads about how it's supposed to work before you show it to them. You're going to have a lot more training to do if you don't involve them from the beginning. And so for a larger project, recording videos and having a portal and these things that we do for our smaller web clients where there's 1 or 2 or maybe 3 people in there managing the solution is fantastic. For a larger solution where we might be building a CRM and a new sales process for 50, 100, 150 people, that's not always going to work because you're going to have a variety of people that need to be able to learn. And so involving them in the discovery, involving them in user acceptance testing, having them sit in on design reviews. When we would have design reviews on those projects that I was managing, so I was doing full-time change management through the entire project, we would do a design review in a conference room with 30 or 40 people in the design review. Now, they weren't all allowed to ask questions and provide feedback during those design reviews because we were working with consultants and we didn't want to eat up the time on that. All the questions had to run through me to go to the consultants. That way I could, condense them. So I think the change management should definitely scale up with the size of the project and the number of people that you're deploying a solution for. And I think if you're somebody that's in an office still and you're in person, that's the thing that I think change management is one of the things that suffers the most now that we're all remote. But one of the most powerful things when I managed a team of developers was if they had nothing to do, I would say, why don't you go take a lap around the office, talk to some users, see what's broken, come back and give me some ideas. And it's harder to do that when everybody's remote. But that was some of the best change management we had because everything we were working on was always an idea that was coming off the sales floor, off the service floor, from the finance team, just from send them up to make a lap. And if nothing else, they'd come back and tell the team sitting next to them that the printer was broken.
I also, when you're talking about scaling, finding that power user across different teams and verticals can really make or break an implementation as well, right? That's something that may not be as applicable if you have a team under 10, but as you start to talking about rolling out solutions to those teams of 100, 200 folks, they are vital, and including them in every step, giving them some decision-making probably, really can make or break implementing it across the board. And then it gives you this wonderful internal resource. There is really nothing better than having a few power users who really know a new solution. And sometimes that may not be who you expect it. It can often be somebody who has used an older system and you're upgrading to a new system and they, just know the business process so well. But sometimes look at your new hires. They might be coming in with experience from other systems that you're implementing a similar solution to your company. So somebody might have really great HubSpot experience. And if you're implementing Salesforce, that might be your power user right there. Even if they've only been with a company 6 months, a year, they probably have great familiarity with just in general how a CRM works. So kind of keep your head on a swivel and see, who else is really able to help share the success of the solution internally.
Yeah. And I used to keep a list of, when I worked for that bigger company, I had a list. I had one designated person on every sales team and every support team. And it was a cross-functional team. We met once a quarter. That was the team voting on the roadmap. That was the team soliciting new ideas from their teams. And when we had any kind of release or bug fixes or something broke and had to be fixed, I would go directly to those people and I'd say, I'm going to show you how to do this. I need you to go show everybody else on your team. And so I could go, if I needed to communicate something quickly, I could go show 20 people. I would just take 5 minutes at each person's desk. And then I need you to go show everybody else on your team. And it was rare that anybody in a company of 450 people had no idea what was happening, or that anybody was coming to me going, something changed about my process and I don't know what it is. They didn't come to me. They went to that person on their team first. And more often than not, my team got to those people.
Something I want to end on, we have shared a ton of information and practical tips, things to think about in your own processes, whether you're a team of 10 or a team of 400, which is quite a large scale when you're talking about technology projects. But there might be someone right now who's listening. They might either be a business owner, a project manager, somehow they are involved in this tech project launch. And they feel like it's going off the rails, that something might be wrong. They're a little bit in trouble. What would you tell them if they find themselves in that position right now? They don't know how to even raise the red flag that something's wrong. What would you share with that person?
You've got to find the courage to say it before it's too late. It's going to be a hard conversation, but a hard conversation when a project is, only halfway to the finish line is recoverable. The earlier you bring it up, the more options that you have. Gather your thoughts, maybe practice in the mirror to get over any stumbles, and then just schedule the call and say it. Be kind, but be straightforward. Let them know that your goal is to find the path forward with them. You're not dropping this on them to solve. You're, in the trenches with them.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a couple of PowerPoint slides. Even if you hate PowerPoint, you're probably going to need them for this conversation. Slide number 1 is, what was the definition of success at the beginning of the project? Or if you didn't define it before you put the rest of those slides together. Slide number 2 is, what is going wrong? Is it risks? There's potentially something that's going to go wrong, in which case, who needs to answer a question that you have on those risks, and what are the answers to those questions? What are the impacts? Is it a budget impact? Is it an adoption impact? Is the thing just not going to work at all? Slide number 3 is, what are the new requirements? I would imagine if something's going off the rails, some new requirements have come out. People are asking for things that you didn't account for up front. And do they or do they not fit within the definition of what does success look like? And then slide number 4 is, how are we going to move forward? You have to either redefine what success looks like. You're going to have to address all the risks, determine and make a decision about whether to incorporate the new requirements, and then figure out what are the budget and timeline impacts of that. Do you have permission to make the project longer? Do you have permission to make it more expensive? And if not, what are you going to compromise either out of the original requirements or out of these risks and new requirements to get everybody on the same page? But at the end of the day, most of these IT projects are not a life or death situation. So as long as you go into it with good intentions and a sense of humor, it normally works out.
I'm so glad you said that, Lisa, because they aren't. I tell myself often before bringing up risks or potential off-rail situation, I go, I am not a heart surgeon, and this is not life or death. This is a technology project, and every problem has a solution. We just have to find it. Thank you both so much for talking. I think this is an absolutely wonderful episode, and I'm so excited to see or to hear about our change management conversation that I think will be coming down the pipeline very soon. We love to talk technology and business. Learn more about Port and Starboard or connect with us in the show notes. Fair winds until next time.